Where is the New Jerusalem now? We have been going through a series on the New Jerusalem, and I've been given permission from the author, Janet Willis, to podcast through her book. I've also written the foreword to the book because I think it's just a phenomenal book full of insights. The book, What on Earth is Heaven Like? The New Creation and the New Jerusalem. And you can pick this up on Amazon, or I will leave a link in the show notes. So we move on to the next topic here. And so both Ezekiel and John, they were looking at a city in the future. And we've talked about a previous episode in which both of John and they're speaking of the same city, the New Jerusalem. John is called the New Jerusalem, with Ezekiel is called the city, but the characteristics is practically identical to each other. That's how we know that they're referring to the same city. And again, I would refer people to that previous episode. But where does the city exist now? And well, in Hebrews chapter 12, God says that like when believers die, they come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus. That's Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 to 24. And what's interesting here is it's very similar to when you look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 10. So it says here that, speaking, of course, referring to Abraham, it says, for he, going back and talking about the inheritance, and about by faith he lived as a foreigner in the promised land. And then in verse 10 it says, for he was looking forward to the city with firm foundations, whose architect and builder is God. I'm going to read that again. This is a lot of interpreters, they just kind of skim over that and is, this is referring to a spiritual, non-material or immaterial city. But that's not what it says. It says the architect is God. And people, again, they just assume, that means it's spiritual. It's not material. Again, there's this Neoplatonic presupposition, this lens they put on Scripture. No, Abraham was looking for a real city, a real city. Again, for he was looking forward to the city with firm foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And then in John 14, Jesus says, there are many dwelling places in my Father's house. Otherwise, I would have told you, because I'm going away to make ready a place for you. Again, if you have this prejudice of, everything is spiritual, everything's non-material, of course you're going to read that into it. But these passages strongly indicate that when Jesus returns, there's going to be something physical that's in heaven at this moment, and it's going to descend to earth. In fact, we see that toward the end of the book of Revelation, the New Jerusalem descending to earth is physical. Some people just assume, everything in heaven is immaterial. And basically, they pit the spiritual against the material, and that's a false dichotomy. You can have spiritual and physical. I mean, look at Genesis 1, right? God created everything good. That was a spiritual reality, and yet it was physical. Well, God is redeeming the new creation to be that again, spiritual and yet physical. If anybody thinks that there's nothing physical in heaven, then they have to deny that Jesus has a physical body. Jesus is in heaven now, and he has a physical body. So the objection that nothing physical is in heaven, it doesn't work. In fact, it falls into heresy, because you got to claim that Jesus doesn't have a physical body. So this heavenly city it's the dwelling place of God. And, Jesus, again, getting back to our Hebrews text, it talks about the countless angels. It's the location of the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And interestingly, so we look at the Hebrews and John and then we have, for example, or a couple places in Hebrews actually, and then in Galatians, the Apostle Paul talks of the city as the, quote, Jerusalem above. In a lengthy passage, Paul explains that there's two cities named Jerusalem simultaneously that existed in his day. And he compares the Jerusalem on earth, the present Jerusalem, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem above. And what he does is he highlights the difference through an allegory based on events that occurred thousands of years earlier. And he quotes from Isaiah 54. Isaiah 54 is an amazing passage on this topic. So, and this is an example of how the New Testament expands on themes first presented in the Old Testament. And throughout chapter 54, Isaiah 54, he presents prophecies about the Jerusalem that are not yet fulfilled. For example, in Isaiah 54, verses 11 to 12, he says, O afflicted one, storm-tossed and not comforted, behold, I will set your stones in antimony, and your foundations I will lay in sapphires. Moreover, I will make your battlements of rubies, and your gates of crystal, and your entire wall of precious stones. So God is telling us that Jerusalem, it has a destiny that will be glorious. And since Paul specifically quotes from this chapter, relating it to the Jerusalem above, and since Isaiah's entire chapter is a prophecy of the future Jerusalem, it becomes apparent that Isaiah's descriptions mirror the New Testament as described by John in the book of Revelation. I think we've answered the question through a few key texts that the New Jerusalem, it does exist. It exists in heaven. And of course, one day we'll be talking a little bit more about that in future episodes, that's going to descend to earth and actually physically on earth. And someone may ask an additional question, well, okay, it's in heaven, but specifically where? Or maybe the more question is, in this certain dimension, right? This abode of heaven, where is it? So, well, if I think Scripture suggests that it's actually above Israel. If Paul says that the city is above, the author of Hebrews says it's in heaven. And I think the clues here is that the New Jerusalem presently could be hovering over Jerusalem right now in, again, some unseen dimension. We're finite beings. There's a lot more going on, in the unseen realm. I know Michael Heiser has talked quite a bit about that as well. But I think hints of the proximity of the heavenly realm to earth are numerous. Again, although the heavenly realm is not normally visible to us, of course, God has made exceptions in the past. One example is when Jacob, in the dream, saw angels ascending and descending on a ladder that reached to heaven. And it said that Jacob declared, "This is none other than the house of God." And this is the gate of heaven. Genesis 28, verse 17. And another example is when Stephen was being stoned. He looked up and saw the glory of God. And he said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened up and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." Of course, that's Acts chapter 7. So if you'd like to watch more of our series on the New Jerusalem and the new creation, you can click on the link for our playlist on this topic.